The air was thick. Tension had turned solid. You could practically see it coiled between them like a drawn wire. And then Karoline Leavitt leaned forward, eyes locked on Bill Maher with a smile so calm it was almost cruel. "You don't actually believe half of what you say, do you?" she said, voice slicing through the studio silence. Maher's face didn't move, not at first, but the silence that followed wasn't strategy. It was hesitation. His smirk faltered, just a bit. The crowd, a loyal mix of left-leaning late-night regulars, held their breath, unsure whether to laugh, cheer, or brace themselves. And then it began, a verbal slugfest that didn't just surprise Maher. It rattled the entire set. For years, Maher had mocked and minced conservative guests with surgical precision, but tonight, Karoline came prepared, not just to survive, but to dismantle. This wasn't just a clash of opinions, it was a demolition, point by point, laugh line by laugh line, until the applause wasn't for the host anymore. But how did it get to this, and what happened in the next 10 minutes that made Maher look like he'd just been hit with his own punchline? Scene setting, 400 words. The studio was familiar, real time with Bill Maher, a Friday night fixture, drenched in cool blue lights and leather chairs that had cradled senators, celebrities, and skeptics alike. The stage, wide and polished, carried the aura of controlled irreverence, where political discourse met comedy, sarcasm wore a suit, and everyone, no matter how famous, danced on eggshells. Karoline Leavitt sat at stage left, legs crossed, navy blazer crisp, hair perfectly set. Young, poised, sharp, the former Trump White House staffer and rising GOP firebrand looked unshaken under the spotlight. Across from her, Maher leaned back with that trademark posture, relaxed but ready, eyes scanning his notes, a pen balanced loosely in his fingers. The audience, mostly LA, mostly left, murmured with pre-show chatter. Some recognized her from Fox segments, others from TikTok reels tearing apart liberal soundbites with millennial venom. The panel included 2 other guests, a tech journalist and a climate economist, but it was clear from the moment the cameras rolled that this night would orbit one axis, Maher versus Leavitt. It started tame. Bill's opening monologue cracked a few bipartisan jokes, scattered applause. Karoline chuckled, not too much. Professional, measured. As the panel discussion unfolded, the tone remained civil. They debated the economy, climate policy, the role of social media in elections. Leavitt made her points without notes, her voice even and steady. Maher, true to form, tossed in punchlines and rolled eyes. The crowd laughed politely. But something was off. Karoline didn't flinch, didn't laugh at the digs. She let them land, then sharpened them. And when Maher pivoted to what he thought would be the easy target, Trump, January 6th, election denialism, that's when the mood changed. Leavitt straightened, leaned in, and smiled. A storm was coming. Foreshadowing conflict, 400. Words. The first real tension crackled during an exchange about media trust. Maher casually tossed out a line. "Let's be honest, Karoline, your side treats Tucker Carlson like he's the Dalai Lama." Laughter. Applause. Karoline didn't flinch. "And you treat CNN like a church," she replied, deadpan. It wasn't the words, though. It was the tone. Calm, controlled, and unmistakably pointed. Maher raised an eyebrow. "Touché," he said, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. From there, the energy shifted. Every line Maher delivered, every smirk-laced jab, was met with a surgical response. Leavitt didn't counterpunch, and she intercepted, dissected. When Maher mentioned Trump's indictments, she asked if Hunter Biden's laptop was still considered Russian disinformation in his world. When the climate expert mocked fossil fuel subsidies, Leavitt brought up China's lithium mines and asked why no one cared about their slave labor. By now the audience was quieter. Laughs were fewer. Maher's jokes were landing lighter, his rhythm interrupted. He started speeding up, a sign longtime viewers knew as his defense mechanism, but Leavitt stayed slow, intentional, calm. And then came the moment, subtle but chilling, when Maher chuckled and said, "You're too smart to actually believe this stuff." She She smiled. That smile didn't say you got me, it said you just made a mistake. First confrontation, 700 words. It started with what Maher assumed would be a throwaway jab. I mean, let's be real, Karoline. January 6th was an insurrection, not a field trip. And your party's still gaslighting the whole country about it. He looked at her like a teacher baiting a student. But Karoline wasn't a student, and this wasn't a classroom. She turned toward him, her posture still, her voice calm. Bill, I condemn political violence from anyone, anytime. But what you're doing, what the entire media complex did, was label 74 million Americans as terrorists because they voted for a guy you don't like. The room went cold. You can call January 6th a tragedy. I do. But don't pretend it was Pearl Harbor. Don't pretend it was 9/11. And don't insult the intelligence of people who watched cities burn in 2020 while media outlets called them mostly peaceful protests. Maher opened his mouth, but Karoline kept going. I was in D.C. that week. I saw the panic, but I also saw the hypocrisy. You want to talk about threats to democracy? What about big tech censoring a sitting president? What about the media pushing fake dossiers and suppressing actual laptop evidence weeks before an election? Now Maher was leaning back. She paused, letting the silence do its work. You don't want truth, Bill. You want narrative. Because narrative gets applause. Truth gets you cancelled. The crowd was stone quiet. Even the tech journalist looked uncomfortable. Maher tried to interject. Come on, Karoline, the truth is Donald Trump lied about the election being stolen. That's not some media plot, that's reality. But she was ready. When my generation Googles something, we don't ask if it's true. We ask who benefits from the answer. That's the level of cynicism we live with. You think that's healthy? She looked directly at Maher now. No smirk. No sarcasm. You built your career making people think, but now you mock them when they think differently. That's not comedy. That's cowardice. Silence again. Even the climate economist was nodding slowly. Karoline continued, I don't agree with everything Trump says, but I understand why people voted for him. Because he didn't mock them. He didn't tell them their values were outdated or that their suffering was their fault. He told them they mattered. And when elites laughed at them, people like you, they doubled down. And then the quote that would go viral. People don't vote for perfection. They vote for someone who sees them. And you stopped seeing them a long time ago. The crowd was frozen, not hostile, just stunned. Maher didn't have a comeback. Breakdown of facade, 500 words. Bill Maher shifted in his seat. He chuckled nervously. Look, I get it, you're passionate, but let's not pretend Trump's some saint. Karoline didn't take the bait. He's not, but he never pretended to be, unlike a lot of people in this town. Maher's voice rose. Oh, come on, Karoline. Don't pull the Hollywood elite card. That's such lazy populism. But the force was gone from his words. Karoline stayed cool. It's not about Hollywood. It's about people with power pretending they don't have any. You stand on a stage every week with an audience and millions watching, and act like you're the underdog. You're not. Maher's hands fidgeted with his pen now. He glanced at the producers. The audience was dead quiet. Someone coughed. He tried to pivot again, but it was too late. His rhythm was gone, his edge dulled. He looked exposed, and the audience felt it. They weren't laughing with him, they were watching him. The liberal lion had met someone who didn't roar. She sliced walk off, final words, 400 words. The show wrapped a few minutes later. Maher muttered a closing line about spirited debate and agreeing to disagree, but the words barely registered. Karoline stood, straightened her blazer, and smiled politely. She shook hands with the panel and even Bill. Thanks for having me, she said. It sounded sincere. He nodded. Yeah, sure. As the cameras cut and the applause flickered on, Maher walked off stage first, not defeated, but definitely altered. Karoline stayed behind for a moment, chatting with the crew, calm and unshaken. She wasn't triumphant, just steady. Outside, Twitter was already on fire. Clips were circulating. One quote in particular had racked up tens of thousands of retweets. People don't vote for perfection. They vote for someone who sees them. That line wasn't just sharp, but it was devastating. Because it wasn't an attack, it was the truth. And in the end, truth, not ideology, not comedy, won the night. Audience CTA 100 words. What? Did you think? Did Karoline Leavitt hold her own, or did Bill Maher expose her? Who do you think made the stronger argument? Drop your thoughts in the comments, but keep it respectful. This kind of clash only works when we actually listen, not just yell. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want more cinematic, unfiltered showdowns like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We've got more real talk, real stakes, and real moments coming soon. See you in the next one. The studio. Lights burned with that familiar, polished intensity, cool, sterile humming just above the audible range. The set of HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher was sharp and tailored, like a boardroom disguised as late-night television. Deep mahogany, paneling, low-hung Edison bulbs, and the faint scent of hairspray and wood polish created a curated sense of intimacy. Cameras glided silently on motorized tracks. The audience, seated in steeped bleachers, leaned forward with the eager, slightly smug anticipation that always fills these spaces before the real show begins. Bill Maher sat at center stage, as always, angled just enough toward the audience to keep the power dynamic intact. His expression wore that effortless arrogance, part smirk, part knowing condescension, refined over decades of being the smartest man in the room. Clad in a dark blazer over an untucked dress shirt, he exuded the energy of someone who believed the world was still catching up to him. Across from him sat Karoline Leavitt, younger, sharper, and utterly still. Leavitt's appearance was deliberate, a solid-colored dress, deep red, bold but respectful. No excessive jewelry, no gimmicks. Her hair tucked behind one ear, posture straight, arms relaxed, but not lax. Her eyes didn't dart, they locked. The stillness wasn't fear, it was calculation. She'd stepped into a lion's den and came with a scalpel, not a sword. Her entire energy said, "Go ahead, underestimate me." The banter began lightly. Maher joked about AI, climate denial, and the TikTok-ification of politics. He lobbed a few warm-up lines, testing the waters, prodding his guests for a soundbite. The audience chuckled in waves, trained like muscle memory to laugh at the beats. But already something was off. Karoline's reactions were tight, precise. She smiled only when it was called for. She didn't play into the rhythm. She paused just slightly too long, just slightly too cold. And that, right there, is where the tension first started to pull. The sense that this wasn't going to be another polite political skirmish. This wasn't a dance. Maher didn't know it yet, but he wasn't guiding this one. He was being shadowed inch by inch toward a confrontation he thought he could control. The cameras were rolling. The studio was quiet. Something was coming, and it would cut far deeper than anyone watching expected. It started with a glance, subtle, almost dismissive. Maher leaned back in his chair, legs crossed, fingers steepled under his chin like a man preparing to lecture a student. He made a comment about young Republicans being more interested, saying going viral than going to college. The audience laughed, but Karoline's smile didn't break past the corners of her mouth. She tilted her head slightly, the kind of movement that says, "I see what you're doing." "You know," Maher continued, "you're very good at branding, I'll give you that, like a social media strategist in pearls." It wasn't a compliment, not really. It was a jab. Clever, dismissive, coated in that Hollywood liberalism that masquerades as tolerant, but delights in belittling anything that smells too red, too rural, too resistant. Karoline shifted in her seat, not defensively, but like a sprinter digging in her heel. Her tone didn't change, her body didn't flinch, but something in the room did. The crowd's laughter thinned. A few people murmured, uncertain if the mood had turned or if it was their imagination. Maher tried to pivot, bringing up Trump, January 6th, the usual anchors of any modern political roast. He assumed she'd squirm, maybe fumble through a sanitized answer about party unity. Instead, she leaned forward just slightly and asked, "Do you ever worry that your audience stopped learning and just started clapping?" Silence. And then, a soft ooh from the audience. Not laughter, not applause, just that uncomfortable exhale of a room realizing someone came to play chess on a checkers board. Maher recovered with a smirk. Look, I've been doing this since you were in middle school, okay? I think I've earned the right to call out political nonsense. But there was a twitch, a tightening at the edge of his jaw. He took a sip of water, adjusted a cuff that didn't need adjusting. Karoline nodded. And that's exactly why people tune out, because they see someone who's been doing this forever and still thinks sarcasm is substance. There it was. The first clean cut, quick, precise, and just deep enough to sting. The audience didn't know whether to laugh or lean in. Maher chuckled, but it felt rehearsed. Tension crackled, and for the first time the veteran looked like he'd lost the rhythm. The real fight hadn't started yet, but the gloves had definitely come off. It came fast, not in volume, but in weight. Maher leaned forward now, hands, animated, voice tighter. Okay, let's just be honest here. You're defending a political party that tried to overturn an election. That's not just branding, Karoline. That's complicity. The words dropped like a gauntlet. No laugh. Line, no wink to the audience, just accusation, raw and sharp. Karoline didn't blink. She didn't inhale sharply. She just looked at him like a doctor diagnosing something terminal. And you're defending a media class that spent years mocking half the country, then acts surprised when they stop listening. That's not journalism, Bill, and that's narcissism. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Someone in the back gasped, audibly. Maher raised his brows, visibly taken aback. For a split second, he seemed to calculate, double down or pivot. He doubled down. Oh, come on, he scoffed. That's just deflection. The right doesn't want conversation, they want submission. You don't debate, you demonize. Now Karoline leaned forward. Her voice didn't rise. It dropped, calm and cutting. You want to talk about demonizing? You compared Trump voters to Nazis on this very show. You mocked the idea of parental rights. You called working-class Americans ignorant, dangerous, and irrelevant. And now you wonder why they tuned you out. The audience was stone silent. Even the usual clappers didn't know which beat to follow. Maher opened his mouth to speak, but Karoline didn't stop. You call that conversation? She said. When someone disagrees with you, you don't argue, you ridicule. You don't challenge ideas, you assassinate character. Maher laughed nervously. Oh, I'm sorry, did I hurt some feelings? And that was his mistake. Karolina's voice sharpened, not louder, just more precise. No, you insulted an entire country of people you don't understand. People who work 12-hour days, who don't get their news from real time, who don't sit in Hollywood green rooms and decide who gets to be called decent. You built a career off mocking them, and you think they care if you're offended by their voters. Bill tried to speak, but this time it was clear. The energy had shifted. Karoline had control. The audience wasn't laughing. They were watching, waiting. She took a breath. This isn't about Trump. This is about contempt. Yours. The media's. The entire establishment. You don't argue to persuade, you argue to perform. And the only people still clapping are the ones who stopped listening a long time ago. Silence again. He blinked, looked around. He reached for another sip of water. A live taping, cameras rolling, lights hot. And for once, Bill Maher looked like the guest on his own show.